The results are in. Where you picked the Bucks to finish, your expectations for second leading score, and what to expect in the spring. We get into that and more back of the roster minutia on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. My name is Justin Garcia. I'm joined, as always, by Camille Davis. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network. You can hear and see Camille on the Locked On NBA show and the Technical Foul podcast. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day each and every day. And all the everydayers out there that have been with us through another long off season, longer than we hoped for. We hope that's not the case next summer. And some of the results, answers that we got tie into that. So we've teased that survey we put out a couple of weeks ago for a little bit now and feel pretty comfortable with the number of replies we got to it. So I figure now's the time to dig into some of your feedback, specifically around the on-the-court product. Is probably going to stretch out over a couple of shows where we get into some of the questions, given there was 20 plus that we threw out there at you, but we figure we're going to start with the big ones here to open up the show today. And a lot of this we've touched on throughout the course of the off season, but very interesting to see where a lot of these results seemed to align. So let's just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off. Camille, we asked you, I believe this was the first question on the survey. Where will the Bucks finish in the Eastern Conference, in the standings this season? And before we show the results, there was 4 options: finish with a top 3 record, finish in the 4 to 6 range, finish as a play-in tournament team, or miss the playoffs. Now, the last one, I mean, it's choose your own adventure. It could be they finish 11th or worse, or they finish as a play-in team and miss the playoffs in that play-in tournament, I suppose. But we did not get a single response that said they would miss the playoffs, which is unsurprising when you've got Giannis on the roster. So before we show the results, where would you place them in all of those options?
Yeah, I think that 4 to 6 range is a very comfortable place to put the Bucks, especially after seeing like that's where they were this past season as well. Some might look at that and be like, well, shouldn't you expect a dip if that's the case? But maybe you forgot about the 2-8 start or the up and down nature of last season in itself. But I do think the roster construction is built in a way around Giannis where this can be a team that is fighting for home court, but might end up just being one of the final playoff teams at the end of the day.
Okay. I would say the same. Our listeners said the same. About 2/3 of you that responded to this survey, and it was a lot. Chose that 4 to 6 range. Top 3 got a little more than a quarter of the responses, and then just a sliver of you had the Bucks as a play-in tournament team. So just trying to do the
I was definitely hoping you were doing the math, because I was sitting here like
6-7% say they would be a play-in tournament team. I'm glad you brought up the 2-8 start from a year ago, because the Bucks finished the season 48-34. The Knicks finished the season 51-31. And I remember pointing this out that last weekend of the regular season when things were starting to build. And I know we kind of said the same thing a year prior of, hey, I'll take my chances with Giannis and Damian Lillard in a playoff series, assuming Giannis was going to come, hoping Giannis was going to come back. And it didn't work out. But last season, I do remember getting into that final weekend. You finished 3 games back of the Knicks. I know you lost the tiebreaker by way of your head-to-head record. But even if you went 5-5 those first 10 games of the season instead of 2-8, you're at least putting yourself in a position going into the final weekend where you could be a top 3 seed.
Yeah.
And then, we're talking about hosting the Detroit Pistons versus facing the worst possible opponent for you. Now, it's kind of a sliding doors universe of, well, what if that happens? And what if the Bucks are a 3 seed and they avoid the Pacers? They get the Pistons. They win in the first round. In that scenario, Damian Lillard Maybe he doesn't get injured. I think that's a little different than maybe Giannis doesn't suffer that injury because of what Dame was coming back from, but maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe he does, but they win anyway. Are they examining the offseason the same way? If
I
that's
don't
the
think
case.
so. I don't think so. I mean, listen, one thing we know about Horst, and we've seen it before, when things aren't working, he's going to try to figure out a way to tinker with that roster and make it work with what they have. And you think about the championship year at that, like there was so much noise around the team of like, hey, if they lose to Brooklyn, there are going to be some wholesale changes with the team here as we've seen it. Like this is the last hurrah for this group. They beat the Nets, they beat the Hawks, they get to the finals and they win it all. And you run it back pretty much the next year after that. Sliding glass door moment, as you mentioned, where like if something changes, like what you were expecting to do, and then the outcome, you have to pivot off of that. So I do think that if it was a situation where the Bucks were hosting and they did get out the first round, maybe you don't do. I mean, I don't think that the Dame thing probably happened unless he does get hurt, and then you're kind of still sitting there like, well, the books were trying to clear this up some. But it might give you a better hope of like, well, this actually does work. The sample size is showing that in the playoffs, in this situation, that this team works. So we're not going to pivot as hard away from a 2-star model. But I think the Dame injury, that piece of it, that's the piece where it's like, if he still gets hurt in a different playoff series, and we did hear that the Bucks were kind of already thinking of like, hey, if this doesn't work this offseason, let's explore some different options with Dame. It could be a different situation. Like maybe there is no Miles Turner on the Bucks going forward. Who knows what that meant for Brook Lopez? Like, would Brook Lopez be back? Would they run? I have no idea. I have no idea. That's interesting to think about, though.
Yeah, I mean, it opens up a totally different can of worms where your second round opponent would have been the Celtics. I can't sit here with a straight face and tell you last year's version of the Bucks was set up to beat the Celtics, so it's probably a second round exit. And again, I think the two were very closely tied. I'm not saying it's directly responsible, but Dame having an extended layoff, dealing with a blood clot in his lower leg, and then suffering a torn Achilles. I think there's a lot of connective tissue between the two of those. So even if you get a second round, a different first round opponent, I think you can make a strong case that, that injury still occurs. You brought up 2021, and not to sidetrack this too much, but it's interesting when we start to derail on some of these things that come up. That's one of the further removed we get from it, one of the more fascinating what ifs, because I mean, I have a hard time even digging into this conversation because, look, you won a championship. So there should be no, but, or tinkering or tweaking, or I would do this differently. Absolutely not. You won a title. But the interesting part is you look at your lot in life now, and you see that the coach that you won a championship with, you fired 2 years after that. And to your point, the vultures were starting to swirl that season, especially when you're down 2-0 and you lose game 2 to the Nets by 49 points or something like that. There was not a whole lot of hope, not a bright outlook. And the assumption was, okay, Bud is getting fired now this spring. And here's the difficult part to say, look, I can't make a strong case to do anything differently when you win a championship, but I have had multiple people tell me this. I want to be clear. None of them are with the Bucks organization. Rick Carlisle resigned from the Dallas Mavericks the day of, I believe, game 3 of the second round series between the Bucks and the Nets. The people I spoke with, Rick Carlisle was pretty positive he was getting the Bucks job, that Mike Budenholzer was going to be fired. It reached its end in Dallas. I'm going to the Bucks next, and I'm going to get to coach Giannis. Then the Bucks go on that run, beat the Brooklyn Nets, win in the conference finals without Giannis, win an NBA championship, and ultimately Rick Carlisle pivots and goes to Indiana, where he was an assistant previously. You have that to grapple with of, you got a championship, but now this guy is in your division, and he's beaten you 2 consecutive years in the postseason. Kenny Atkinson, we talked about kind of lining up with him twice, 2 different hiring cycles. Didn't happen. Now he's in your division, and he led the Cavaliers to a 1 seed last year, probably a 1 seed this year as well. That it's just funny how things work out, that you can't complain because you want a title, but you look at it and you say, man, wish I didn't have to go against those 2 guys
I know
8
that's
times a
right.
year.
Truly, like tacticians when it comes to the game, trying to coach against them, which I mean, when people were even previewing Pacers Bucks this past season, one of the edges that the Pacers continuously got was a coaching edge of like, hey, we really trust Carlisle in these situations, and the way that he's able to adjust on the fly, like it's invaluable. So yeah, that's definitely one of those moments you look back at it and you think of like all that could have happened if the Bucks did not win the title. But ultimately, as you said, I wouldn't do anything differently. Like it resulted in a championship, a really special championship for the city. It was coming off of COVID too. And I do love the fact that that Bucks championship is a championship that's celebrated on its own. There aren't any other like champions from July. So it is kind of like special with the Bucks, where it's like, okay, this is our time. We get to celebrate this annually, and it is what it is. So I wouldn't trade anything, but man, the things that could have happened if things did not work out for them.
I believe my dates were off. It was after game 5.
But it was during that series, I knew for sure.
Yes, it was during that series. It was after game 5 that Rick Carlisle resigned in Dallas. And I mean, I'm not saying it was just, well, this is it. Now they're down. But like, I think there was a lot of reading the tea leaves. I mean, that was one of the murmurs that was going on throughout that season of we got to see it this year from Bud, and the expectations are sky high for this group. But yes, after game 5, which I believe that was the Jeff Green game, right? Where KD was incredible, but Jeff Green had the game of his life, a game the Bucks should have won. They lose, and then they're down 3-2 facing elimination. Rick Carlisle resigns, and you start to think, is this going to look a lot different next year? But didn't happen, and you got a championship to show for it. All right, we only got through one of these questions. We got a couple more to get through, and a couple other updates from around the league, so we'll get into that coming up after this. NFL season almost here, just a day away, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel makes it easier than ever to get in on the action, player props, building same-game parlays, even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That is FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, so again, the majority saying 2/3. The Bucks are going to finish where we both would slot them as well, in that 4 to 6 range. Let's just jump into this one next, since it's tied to it as well. How many wins do you think the Bucks will have this upcoming season? It was what, 49 and 48 in the last 2 seasons. So the options we gave were 50 or more, 45 to 49 in the same range they were these last 2 seasons, 40 to 44, basically a 500 team. Or do you think the wheels are going to fall off and be a losing team here? No one chose less than 40. But again, the majority, close to 2/3, said 45 to 49 wins for this group. And a brave portion of you, almost a quarter of the audience, is saying 50-plus wins for this group, something the Bucks have not done since they were the 1 seed and lost to the Miami Heat. So I'm assuming I know where you're at, Camille. I'm in the 45 to 49 win range here, but is that where you would be as well?
It is. And I tell you one thing, I was a little surprised at how many people had the 50 plus, like 23% if you round up there. And I was like, man, that's almost a quarter of respondents here thinking the Bucks are going to finish with at least 50 wins. Now, if that does occur and the Bucks are a 50 plus win team in the East, that makes me think the Giannis MVP, MV3 is full-fledged on the table, because if this is a Bucks team that surpasses 50 wins, coming off of a season where you lost Dame, expectations for you are as low as they have been since you've really started your winning ways back in like 2018. So what is this team like? That to me screams, if the Bucks win at least 50 games, Giannis is doing MVP things. Well, he's always doing MVP things, but he should get the acknowledgement of the title, the trophy once again, if the Bucks are a 50+ win team.
If they win 50+ games, he will at least finish third in
Like
MVP
he has for the
voting.
last 3 years, 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah. Was he third last year? I can't even remember now.
I think he was third last year too.
Together, but
Or maybe fourth.
yeah, I mean, he's been in the top 4 7 straight seasons. But regardless, if he wins, if the Bucks win 50 or more, he will at least finish third. And I say that because whoever wins the West, their best player is going to be up there in the running. And I can already feel the groundswell and the narrative getting to work and starting to support skinny Luka Doncic and his chances at an MVP. So, look, even if the Bucks finish in the top 3, we're going to have to look long and hard at Giannis for the MVP here. So, I mean, even saying top 3, I'll bump it up to top 2. He will finish no lower than second if the Bucks win 50 or more games, because to your point, he's habitually been in the top 3 at worst top 4. But yeah, I think it's all going to depend on what happens in the West, the perceived much tougher conference. But it's kind of like, look, if the Bucks do that, if they're in contention in the Eastern Conference, it's similar to the conversation that's happening to the north of us here, where if the Packers are the 1 seed, one of 2 things are going to happen. Jordan Love's the MVP, or Micah Parsons is probably Defensive Player of the Year. Right. If the Bucks are in that talk, I mean, Giannis has been there routinely, but it's like, it's always been, yeah, but with the way that nationally we've assessed Giannis's performance the last few years, like, yeah, he's great, but let's look for the others. You're not going to be able to do that if we're talking about a Bucks team winning 50 games with these expectations.
No, you're not. And again, I say it often, part of the MVP conversation, dialogue, selection is narrative. Like the numbers have to be numbers for sure, but there's always like a narrative component to it as well of like, man, I didn't expect this. And that's why I think like this season, if the Bucks are able to be a 50+ win team, this is a year where a Giannis MVP would make a lot of sense, because you saw the starts of it last season with that mid-range game becoming more consistent. I think for Giannis too, because he goes about his work on the court in such a Giannis way where people kind of downplay what he does because they assume it's just dunking and that's all that he's doing. It is just this, but it's like, it's the touch around the rim. And now he has this mid-range game. People for years have wanted Giannis to have the 3 ball in this game, but like the mid-range is something that he's been working on, looked comfortable with last year. So if that part of his game continues to grow and people are seeing Giannis get his buckets consistently in different ways, while also having the high assist numbers, getting his teammates involved, being the engine, being the point guard of the team, like all the narrative around the numbers, because the numbers have been consistent for Giannis. And if he finds a way to continue at it, getting to those numbers in different ways, and even like upping his assists, like if it's a career high in assist year for Giannis, plus, all this other stuff, it just screams MVP to me.
2 more that we want to get to on this one, and a lot of more detailed questions we threw out there that will probably weave into other conversations leading up to the start of the season. So let's just rip through these really quickly here. The expectations for this group. Where do you expect to see the Bucks finish the season? Not standings, but end of the playoffs. Where will they be? Something we've been searching for 4 years now. Reaching the second round. More than half of you chose that's your option. Conference finals, reach the second round, lose in the first round, only make the play-in tournament or miss the playoffs. Nothing for those final 2. So about a quarter of the audience said they'll lose in the first round again. About a quarter said they'll reach the conference finals, and about half said they'll reach the second round.
Listen, I love the fact that Bucks fans can look at this team, understand what's been done, and also respect the floor of Giannis and what he brings to a team to say, like, they're going to make the playoffs. Now, what happens once they get there, we'll see. But it seems like the confidence is pretty decently high to have a little bit over half of your respondents here saying like it's a second round. Like we're finally getting out the first round this year. It's going to happen. And then seeing that other quarter well, not a quarter, but other like 25% there saying like, no, it's conference finals. Like the East is open. And that's the piece I do keep hearing from people who are very high on the Bucks of like, why not us? Why not us? The East is open. I can give you some why not, but I'm not in this moment. But I can understand why you could look at this and be like, it could be us. A lot of things have to break right, but like it could be us. I get it. I wouldn't say it myself, but I get it.
The Venn diagram of those who chose conference finals and those who chose 50 wins has to be fully filled in 100% there. One other question I want to get to, we'll get to that coming up after our last break here, and then also some tidbits on the back half of the roster and one very interesting thing going on in Inglewood. We'll get to that discussion coming up after this. So the last one to get to for today's show is, again, a topic we have poured over quite a bit this offseason, and that is Giannis and then what? So we asked you who is going to be the second leading scorer on this team. We've shared our thoughts many times on different shows here this summer, but we laid out a handful of options, and I'm a little surprised at who was overwhelmingly chose as who our audience thinks will be the second leading scorer here. I'm not stunned, but I expected a closer battle between two names. So the majority of you said 40%. The options: Miles Turner, Gary Trent Jr., Kevin Porter Jr., Bobby Portis, AJ Green, Kyle Kuzma, or there was a write-in option. And we got a decent amount in those write-ins of people saying Miles Turner, Gary Trent, Kevin Porter Jr. are all going to average about the same points. But Gary Trent Jr. got about more than 40% of the vote is who you think will be the second leading scorer. Then we had Kevin Porter Jr. and Miles Turner, both at around 25%, just under it. Miles Turner was technically second in this group, and Kevin Porter Jr. was third. My surprise is I thought Kevin Porter Jr. and Gary Trent Jr. were basically going to be neck and neck.
Yeah, I could see that too. I was a little shocked that more people were for Gary. I was even shocked that there were more people for Miles Turner, even if it's just slightly over Kevin Porter Jr. But I do understand the Miles Turner piece of it. It's a consistent guy who you've seen, get you, 17, 18 points a game. You kind of put him in that Brook Lopez role next to Giannis. You expect it. Like we talked about it before, how the network was getting ready to do a top 100. And we assume that the only other player outside of Giannis that would be in that list would be a Miles Turner. So I can understand why people would point to that. But to your point about the split between Gary and Kevin, I too thought that would be closer because so much of the conversation this offseason has been around those two guards, even before they re-signed, of like, well, if you could only get one back, like which one and what's the role that you see for him? And Kevin Porter Jr. is walking into a situation where he presumably could be the starting point guard of this team, get a lot of playing time. You saw the chemistry develop with him and Giannis last season. You saw how his numbers rebounded with the Bucks after what he did with the Clippers earlier in the year. So there's something to it, but I could also see very well people being like, I'm not sure how much of this part was like what's real from the Clippers season, what's real from the Bucks season. Yeah. Which Kevin Porter Jr. will we get this upcoming season? And Gary Trent has just been more of kind of like a consistent bucket getter in that role for a bit longer. Yeah.
We also asked you about offensive rankings, defensive rankings, the coach, your thoughts on John Horst. We'll weave those into other discussions here in the coming days or weeks as we get into the season, but those were the high level ones that we started the survey with, and a lot of aligned thoughts by Bucks fans. So not a whole lot of across the board. No shots fired here, but couldn't help but notice there are no votes for Kyle Kuzma to be the second leading scorer in that. We did have one question that we did not get to here that up until I don't know, maybe a week ago, was unanimous, the
Mhm.
results. And then it started to change a little bit. But we'll continue to share those results here as we move through the rest of the offseason. I wanted to touch on a couple other things. I don't recall if it was Bill Ryder or somebody, Evan Sidery maybe from CBS Sports, Captain Obvious. No disrespect intended to him, but hey, Bucks are trying to create some space at the back of the roster. No duh. You got 17 guys, 15 of them fully guaranteed. So you're going to have to do something there. But it prompted a lot of what we talked about on yesterday's show. And we've talked about in the past too with, I mean, it's hard not to view this as Andre Jackson Jr. is going to be the odd man out. They pushed back the guarantee date to the deadline day for cut downs. I think that in itself says something. And, we talked about maybe even look at packaging. Not that we're saying this is going to happen, but just trying to find creative ways of, could you pair them with another asset and make a 2-for-1 deal or something to create another space there? I was asked, I'm sure you've been asked too by others of, well, why don't they just trade him then?
Yeah.
And I believe in that report, it was indicated the Bucks were looking for multiple second-round picks. I mean, can't get it if you don't ask for it, but there just hasn't been a market for it. And I think any team that views this is going to say, we don't think, no, like we know what you have to do here. You got to cut him. If we're that interested in him, we'll just sign him and not give up any assets.
Right. Like, why should we give up an asset if we can look at what your situation is and be like, well, if we want him, we can just wait until he's actually cut. So the back of the roster piece of the Bucks is like the current thing to keep an eye on right now. I mean, it's the beginning of September. We know what this means for the NBA calendar with news and whatnot. So that's for the Bucks. I mean, the NASA signing, as we talked about, with it being a guaranteed deal, it's like, okay, now you have 15 guaranteed. We knew the coffee one was a camp deal. So initially it was like, okay, well, is Andre safe from coffee? And now it's like, or either one of them safe now that the NASA has made. Maybe it is as straight up as like these 15 guaranteed guys are what we intend to roll with. If something changes through training camp, we have the flexibility to try to figure something out there. But ultimately, we think this is our 15.
We've already kind of touched on it. I don't want to spend too much time in it. And I'd like to get Frank or somebody else thoughts on it. But there was excitement is probably the wrong word, but it was just like, oh, okay, they're still doing something for all the calls of, hey, they got to find somebody at the wing position. And there was a lot of like, hey, all right, eyebrow raised intrigue when the Bucks signed Amir Coffey. But we both said we assumed he'd make the roster at that point. And with the benefit of hindsight, you do have to kind of take a step back and say, well, everybody that's clamored for how did he only sign this? Like, how did he only sign a camp deal? How could he not get a fully guaranteed deal? There's always a reason, right? And the fact that it took this long into the offseason to sign, he's not necessarily rangy. He's tall, but doesn't have great wingspan. The defense has always been we'll see. That the more you kind of take a step back and observe, you think maybe it's just our thirst for a bigger wing player that we're just hyping this. Same with we've done with other players. We've all done it. So I'm very curious to see what happens with Amir Coffey. If this was more of like a favor, given I believe he has a relationship with Doc Rivers. And this is a, hey, just give us a difficult problem, give us something where we have to figure out how to keep you on this team, or we're doing you a solid where we're giving you the opportunity to showcase yourself and find work elsewhere if you have a strong camp and preseason. Last piece of news here, and this just came out this morning, Wednesday morning. The Pablo Torre Finds Out series, who has uncovered some gems already this calendar year and summer especially. Their latest is on some potential cap circumvention by the Los Angeles Clippers. So long story short, it's basically like NIL coming to the NBA, where Steve Ballmer funded a company that I haven't listened to the full episode yet, but that may or may not be a shell company that Kawhi Leonard signed a deal with, which is not uncommon. When you sign with a team, you have partners of the team that players will get deals with to be a spokesman or sponsor. But it's typically not $28 million, which is what Kawhi Leonard was paid. And the belief is this was done to circumvent the salary cap, which I joked about NIL at the collegiate level, but this is one of the more interesting things to monitor in the next few years. Not just this specifically, but all of this landscape and even what you and I are doing right now, Camille, because I can tell you there is another podcast out there that includes a now current member of the Milwaukee Bucks. And it started when he was a member of the Milwaukee Bucks, continued while he was rehabbing from a torn Achilles. So I think you can gather who it is that we're talking about. But when it launched, the thought was it was going to be on the Bucks platform until they suddenly realized we can't do this because that is cap circumvention. If you're going to make money off of this, why wouldn't other teams just say, well, we'll pay you the minimum, but then you can do this podcast for us and we'll pay you $5 million and you can keep the ad revenue too. So things like that are where it gets tricky and where shrewd businessmen, and that's every single owner in the league now, are going to find ways to get around the rules.
Yeah. Pablo Torre, like the investigative journalism, sports journalism, like shout out to him for doing it first and foremost. When I saw the story break, I was like, wait, what? Like, is this serious? And then seeing the documents, and I was like, I just keep wondering, like, what's the NBA's response going to be to this? Like, as more people investigate it, what comes of it? Like you mentioned, like, is this a Joe Smith situation with Minnesota? Like what happens with this? That's the piece of it now where I'm like, now what? Like, that's where I am of now what happens. And I can't wait to see what happens. And if punishment does come down, how stern will that be? Is it money? Is it draft picks? Is it like, what can the NBA do to try to signal to other teams too of like, hey, don't get no ideas. Don't try this. You have to stop.
I think Bucks fans are going to be out for blood to see
as they should be.
The punishment, if any, is going to be for the Clippers here. We eagerly await what the response is from Steve Ballmer and the Clippers. I know there was a lawsuit in there too, and I believe it was Kawhi that was seeking some unpaid fees because this company, surprise, surprise, filed for bankruptcy. But yes, I would encourage everyone to check it out and get all of the details. You bring up Joe Smith. Do you remember what the penalty was for Joe Smith? So that was the first circumvention of the cap where Glenn Taylor basically gave him a briefcase full of cash under the table to sign with the Timberwolves.
I remember they got fined a lot of money, like a few million.
At the time, a huge amount. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember they lost some draft picks, but if I remember correctly, they got some back eventually.
So this was
like the early 2000s.
Yeah. The Timberwolves are fined $3.5 million. They had to void Joe Smith's contract.
Yep.
And I believe Joe Smith was penalized somehow in this as well. I don't remember what the penalty for him was. But the Timberwolves were also stripped of 5 first-round picks for this. So it was basically
get some back too, eventually.
That I don't remember, but it was basically Joe Smith signed a series of low-value 1-year contracts to get his bird rights for later, and in doing so, it saved the Timberwolves money. And they basically told him, "We'll make you whole under the table." And I don't even recall who the whistleblower was or how this was found out. Glenn Taylor had a suspension. Kevin McHale was the general manager of the Timberwolves. He was suspended. Those picks that they lost, first rounders, were 2001 through 2005. And he did not get his bird rights, and that forced him to take a very, very steep pay cut following the following season when I think he signed with the Pistons. I think that's when that happened. Shout out to Joe Smith, too, by the way, who's the only Bucks player we ever had an interview with on the radio station I worked with in college in lacrosse, and couldn't have been any less interested in doing a radio interview in La Crosse, Wisconsin, but still we were trying to spread the word of the Bucks up there in God's country. So we got that going on. And of course, the Bucks lost their 2022 second round pick for he who shall not be named, and everything that went on with that in the fall that they made the trade for Drew Holiday. And we thought there was another piece coming over. So Bucks lost a second rounder for that. They were also, I think this still holds true, the only team that's ever been fined for quote unquote tampering with their own player in 2019. So yeah, Bucks fans, no sympathy for the Clippers.
Not even a little bit. Like, again, waiting to see what I already had someone in my mentions. Like, if this was the Bucks in this situation, the
league is asking the Bucks to forfeit the season.
Right. Like, we wouldn't be in the playoffs for 4 years. It'd be
Giannis Antetokounmpo has been granted immediate free agency.
Right. Like, something crazy would happen if it was us. But we'll see what happens to the Clippers. Like, yeah, I need to see what happens now.
Boy, can you imagine the tweets from Shams too? Like Giannis, summer of exploring and considering all options. It's only gotten worse now. So we got a couple other things coming up here in the coming days. Locked On, the network, is going to reveal their top 100 list next week. Camille mentioned before, not sure. I think maybe the Bucks will have two. We'll see how that tracks, and more importantly, where Giannis is on that list. So that'll be starting to trickle out on Monday. So we'll dig into those results. We did it last year, and we're bringing it back. We'll see what NBA 2K has to say about the Bucks this season. The game officially releases on Friday. There's earlier versions that are out there as well. So I think we're trying to time up our Friday show with the season simulation. Van is going to be back on to share some thoughts on some of these questions on the back of the roster and some other things that have happened. We're trying to get Frank's thoughts outside of just Twitter on Thanasis Antetokounmpo. And then we have a couple other, I guess in the wrestling world, you'd say gimmicks, but some other things that you and I were discussing to look at where the Bucks rank against the rest of the Eastern Conference. So we'll get into that starting next week, where at that point, we're 3 weeks away from training camp beginning. That'll do it for today's show, though. Thanks to everybody for tuning in today, all off season, all through the season as well. That was the other thing that stood out, Camille. I don't know if we'll share the results on that question specifically. It was more just, let's get to know the audience a little bit more. And look, one of the other items of feedback we got, we recognize it. You want us to interact with you in the comments a lot more. We go through spurts where we do, and then it just kind of falls off the radar. So made a note of it. We will definitely be much more active in the comments. But the majority of the audience says, hey, we're everydayers. Like, our interest in the Bucks, it's all season long. And I would say we consume this content daily, not just a couple of times a week or every so often. So a lot of everydayers that are out there. So thanks everybody for tuning in every single day into today's episode as well. If you have not, a vast majority of you have, like and subscribe the video. It helps us out immensely, helps us get to know our audience much, much more as well, and helps us bring new and different things to you. For your second listen of the day, check out the Locked On NBA podcast, where there is no offseason. Camille can attest to that. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiation, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find the Locked On NBA show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And you got Locked On Game Night as well, which you can find Camille on what, Mondays?
Yep. I'll be on the Sunday show this week.
Every single day that they're getting after it.
Every day.
On that one. That'll do it for today. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.